and I'll go back to Excel, and I'll go back to the workbook that I was working with right over here. Good. Right now, this is just normal data. We would even call that raw data. Let me show you how to format as a table. I'll pick on the Home menu up top, Home. Now I'm going to come over here and I'll pick on the word Format as a Table. See it? Right there. And then you have all these different styles. So you can choose whichever one that you like. They all work the same way. It's just a matter of how you like to see it. I'm going to check on this one over here because then every other row will be that shade of color. I'm going to click right there. And I'm going to click on OK. And now this is a formatted table. First of all, it's easier to read. At least the format that I chose is easier to read. That's one benefit of the formatted table. Second of all, notice how the pull downs are there. I'm going to undo that. Notice before I do the formatted table, the pull downs are not there. Let me just go ahead and redo it up here, of course. Redo and apply the table. Now, when you have the formatted table, the pull downs are automatically there at the top of the column, which, like I just showed you, facilitates the sort and the filter. So that's another benefit of using the table. Now, let me show you a couple big benefits of using the table. This is going to grow as your data grows so that it really facilitates large amounts of data. So I'm going to come over here to cell A211, and you can see right now it's blank. Let's say I want to have today's date in a cell. Here's a keyboard shortcut for you. I'll do Control semicolon. Control semicolon will give us today's date. And I am recording it on September 27th, 2017. So that is today's date. Now, if you do Control semicolon and it gives you a different date than what you're expecting, it's because your computer clock needs to be reset. But usually Control semicolon will give you today's date. Now, you can kind of see that the table extended to that row. Now, I'm going to type in the word, I'm going to type in the letter U. And notice how that completes that for me. So another benefit of the table is that it has the autocomplete feature when you're typing in your data. That's very helpful for data entry. Now I'm just tabbing over. Really, I just need the US dollar amount. Let's say I type in $12 there. Now I'll come over here and type in L for lunch. And notice how it did an autocomplete there. But I'm going to go to the next one, everybody. The next row, I'll do Control semicolon. There's today's date. I'll type. Now notice how the table really extended to that row. So my point there is when you start to type in your data at the bottom of the table or on the right hand side, it'll automatically expand it. I'm going to type in U for United States. Good. I'll type in $15 and I'll type in dinner. D for dinner, and the dinner auto completes. But clearly you can see that the table extended to those new rows, as we can see. Now let me show you one of my favorite features of these tables. I'm going to come over here and I'll go to cell G1, and let's say I'll type in something that's called sales tax. So I'm recording this from Pennsylvania in the United States, and in Pennsylvania we have a 6% sales tax. So watch what I'm going to do. Notice, first of all, that the table expanded the column G, so it really does expand when you add more rows or more columns. Now here's one of the great features of one of these tables. It helps you with your formulas. I'm going to type in the equal sign like I always would to start a formula. I'm going to click on that number right there, which is usually cell E2. But now the table says it has the field name of US dollar amount. So I didn't have to do anything different. I'm just going to go with it. Now I'll type in times 6%. Now, instead of saying E2 times 6%, it has the US dollar amount, the field name. But I didn't have to do anything different. I did it the same way. Now, when I hit the Enter key, watch column G. Notice how they all filled in. That's really a great benefit of these tables. It's going to save you a lot of time. When I did that formula, it automatically wanted to put that all the way down the column. That's a great feature. Now, let's go ahead and format column G. I'm going to highlight column G, and of course, I'll make a currency format. Good. Let's try that again. I'm going to insert a new column at column H. I'm going to right-click on column H and pick on Insert. Here I'll type in line total. That'll be the column title. Clearly, the table just expanded all the way down as you can, to that column, right? So that's a nice feature. Line total. Good. Watch how we do a formula again on this table. I'll say equals. I'm going to click on the 2477, which is really cell E2, but it says US dollar amount because it's one of those tables. I'll type in a plus sign, and then I'll click on the 149, and now it says the sales tax. So the formula says US dollar amount plus the sales tax. I'm going to hit the enter key, and notice how it goes all the way down. So that's a great benefit of these tables. So if we go back to our slides now, notice how this slide is showing you how to make your table at the beginning by saying format as table on the home menu. Now the next screen would allow you to, the range should already be selected, and you click on OK from there. And then you can see how the next slide has what we call the formatted table. Let's keep on going now. Now I'm going to skip a couple of these slides just in the interest of time. We can come back to that one later. It's not a big deal. It shows you how to make a quick data entry form. So I can come back to that one in a little while. All right, now the next feature I want to show you to manage large amounts of data is called the Vlookup. So let's go back to our Excel workbook. And I'm going to go back to a different workbook over here, which is the Vlookup examples. All right. Now here I have sheet 1, and I have a list of customers. And you can see how sheet 1 has the customer ID. Now I'm going to pick on sheet 2. Notice how sheet 2 has a list of the orders, and sheet 2 also has the customer ID field. But notice how on sheet 2, I don't have the company name, I just have the customer ID. Well, I'd like to show the company name here on this sheet. So what we'll have to do is we'll take customer ID and look it up on the other sheet. When we find the right one, we'll have to return the company name back to this sheet. That would be like a textbook example of when to use the Vlookup. The Vlookup is really great when you have to look up and retrieve information from a different sheet. Let's see how it's going to work. First of all, I'd like to insert a new column at column C. I'm going to right click on letter C, and I'll pick on the word insert. And now you can see that we have a new column. So I'm going to call this column company name. That's just a column heading. That's not a big deal. All right, so let's start the Vlookup formula. Now you can always type it in, but I'm going to type in the equal sign. Like any other formula, we'll have the equal sign. And then follow my mouse right over here. We're going to pick on this FX. The FX allows you to do open up this window that's called Insert Function. This is such a powerful screen in Excel because it shows you a list of all your available functions. You can search for them up here, or you can find them by category. And notice how there's many categories of the functions. Well, I happen to know that the Vlookup is under the lookup and reference category. If you didn't know that, you would search for it up here. But anyway, I'm going to pick up the word lookup and reference. Now I'm going to scroll down on this list towards the bottom, and we find one that's called Vlookup. All right, so under the lookup and reference category of the insert function window, and it's called Vlookup. Now you can always go to your help screens here and see what the help screens have to say, but I'm going to show you how to use it right now. I'm going to click on OK. Now this screen is called function arguments or function parameters. The Vlookup needs 4 pieces of information, as you can see, 4 function arguments. The first one is the lookup value. That means what are you trying to look up? I'm trying to look up that customer ID. So for the lookup value, I'll pick on cell B2. All right, that's what I'm trying to look up, the customer ID. Now I'm going to pick where it says table array. The table array is also called the lookup table, and many times it's on a different sheet like it is now. It doesn't have to be on a different sheet, but many times it is. So follow my window. I'm going to pick on the space where it says table array, and I'm going to come down here and pick on sheet 1 at the bottom. Good. Now I'm going to highlight the entire column A all the way over to D. And that'll be my lookup table. Now the lookup table can be many, many columns across and many, many rows down. And it certainly could be on a different sheet like it is here. The most important part about the lookup column, the lookup table, is the first column. That's what has to match. Remember how we were looking for customer IDs? And notice how you have customer IDs over in the first column. It doesn't have to be column A. It just worked that way this time. It just has to be the first column of the table that you choose for the table array. That's the one that has to match the first column. Now let's see how we're going to calculate the column index number. What you do is you count from the left side of the table. On the table, this is column 1, 2, 3, and 4. I want the company name. The company name is the second column on the table. 1, 2. So for that reason, for the column index number, I'll type in 2. And that means when I find the appropriate row in the lookup table, based on the customer ID, I want the second column of information, which is going to be the company name. Now, for the range lookup, you almost always type in the word false. It says to find an exact match, type in false. Probably like 8 out of 10 times, if not more, you'll type in the word false there to get an exact match. If you're looking for a PO number, you want to find that exact PO number. If you're looking for a part number, you want to find that exact part number. So for the lookup value, I have B2, which is the customer ID over here. The table array is the one that's on the other sheet. Sometimes it could be on a different workbook. Here's the sheet 1, column A through column D. The number 2 means when I find the appropriate row based on the customer ID, I want the second column from the table, which will be the company name. And then I have the word false now there. If you look over here, it says false means you want to find an exact match. I'll click on OK. Now look at the formula that it gives you. After a while, you can just type that in. But the way we got to it, we picked in this fx over here within the insert functions. Now it looks like it returned a company name based on that customer ID. So it took that customer ID, looked it up on the other sheet, found the proper one, and then returned the second column, which is the company name. Let's see if it found the right one. Notice how the customer ID says VINET, and then we can see the company name. Now I'm going to go back to sheet 1. These happen to be in alphabetical order. And here's the one that we were looking for on row 86, VINET, and it looks like it got the proper company name. So it looks like the VLOOKUP really worked. Now I'm going to go back to sheet 2. Now watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy that all the way down. Here's another shortcut for you, as promised. I'm going to go ahead and click on this cell and get the black cross in the corner of that cell. Now, some of you are used to using the black cross and dragging it all the way down. Here's a shortcut. I can double click on that black cross. When I double click, it goes all the way down. So that's a really good shortcut instead of having to drag it. Notice how it gave me a company name for each different customer ID based on the VLOOKUP. That's like a textbook example of when and how to use the VLOOKUP. Notice how the VLOOKUP says the word false right there. That means we have to find an exact match. Let me show you what that means. I'm going to come over here and I'll type in VVVVV. And notice now it says NA. NA means not available or not found. All right. So it says that because I was looking for an exact match. It didn't find an exact match, so it says NA. Now let's fix that again. I'm just going to undo up here and put that to the original value, and now it does find the company name. So take a look at the VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP B2 is the cell that we're trying to look up, which is right here. Now the second parameter of the VLOOKUP, usually that's where it's on a different sheet or maybe even a different workbook. Here it says sheet 1, column A through column D. Usually, it's better to do the whole column. It'll really work out much better for you. The 2 means I want to get the second column from that table, which is the company name. And the false means we want to do an exact match. So you can see how the VLOOKUP would be very helpful to help you look up information on a different sheet. Let's go back to our slides again. There's the VLOOKUP, just like we just did it. And then you can see it would return for us the company name based on the other sheet. Now, if you look at the next slide, here we have a sort. Remember how we already did this sort, so we can just skip that one. Then this is another sort. And now this is where we picked on the word sort on the data menu so we could sort by more than one field, right? So the slide deck is really helpful. Go back to the forum where you're watching this video, and they can send you the PowerPoint slides. But those are available for you. So now notice how this is showing you where we did sort by more than one field. Now this slide is showing you the filter. See how it shows you the location of the filter up there on the data menu. And then the result of the filter is then we have the pull downs on the top of each column, and then you can start to pick and choose them as you need to. So notice how the slide deck has the sort and the filter, which we already went over. But that's a good reference for you. Here's how we did a filter on the number fields. Remember how we picked on the US dollar amount pull down, then we went over to number format, number filter, and then you can see how we were able to get that done. And this is the filter for the dates. Remember how we picked on the date field? We picked on date filter, and then you have all those built-in the date ranges. And then you can see in this case, next thing that we're going to do is a great feature that's called a subtotal. So let me go back to our data now. You can see how the slide is talking about something that's called a subtotal. I'd like to show you that one. I'm going to go back to Excel. And in this case, we'll pick on this workbook that's called Count If and Sum If. Now, I'm going to go to a different sheet here. I'm going to pick on the sheet that's called Europe Expenses, or Europe Expenses. Right, okay. Now, I want to show you something that's called a subtotal. Really great feature. So again, you're going to use that same kind of data. It's important that the field names are up top, and we have one consistent block of data. To use the subtotal feature that's built right into Excel, you have to sort your data first. Very important. Let's say I wanted subtotals by expense type. We'd have to sort by expense type first. Let's do that. So remember how we did that. I'll pick on one cell in the expense type column. I'll pick on the data menu, and I'll pick on the A to Z right there. And now you can see how all the breakfast items are together and all the dinners are together and so on. So it's very important to sort before we do this next step. Otherwise, the next step doesn't work right. I'm going to go ahead and click on one of those cells that's not blank. And then here come the subtotals. I'll pick in the data menu up top. And I'm going to come over here and I'll pick in the word subtotal right there. Good. Now we get this window. You see where it says at each change in? That has to be the same field that you just sorted. So for that reason, I'll pick on expense type. It's important that you sort by one of your columns, and it's also important that you pick the same field over here that we sorted, and that's why I chose expense type. Now I'm going to click on this pull down where it says use function. Then you have different mathematical calculations. Sum, count, average, minimum, maximum, product, standard deviation, and variance. So we have some good ones in there. I'll pick on sum. Now it says add the subtotal to. So in this case, you can pick as many as you wanted to. I'll pick on currency amount and then US dollar amount. In fact, I'm going to uncheck it where it says expense type because that's not a number field. But we could have chosen as many as I wanted to here. Here's what I have. At each change in expense type, use the function sum and add the subtotal to currency amount and US dollar amount. What are we asking for? We're saying for each different expense type, get a sum of this column and get a sum of this column. The way we got to this window was we picked on the data menu up top and we came over here and picked on the word subtotal. I'm going to click on OK. Let's see what we have. Notice now I have the breakfast total. Right? That wasn't there 2 minutes ago. If I scroll down, now I have the dinner total, entertainment, gifts. You have the total for each different category. And if I go all the way down to the bottom, we even have a grand total. So in just a couple minutes, we have subtotals for each expense type and a grand total as well. Let me show you a great feature of the subtotal. So I'm going to scroll back to the top. Notice over here on the left, this column was not there before. The subtotals put that there for us. I'm going to pick up this number 2 right there and watch what occurs. Now I just have the subtotals only, you see? So that is really helpful. I'm going to pick on the number 1, and then I just have the grand totals by itself. I'll pick on the number 2, and you get the subtotals. I'll pick on the number 3, and you get all the detail. So that column is built right in when we do our subtotals. This way you can easily collapse or expand your subtotals with the 1, 2, or 3. Watch how we did the subtotals again. It's such a great feature. Of course, you have your big list of data with the field names up top. I'm going to pick on one cell that's not blank, and also notice how the expense type column is sorted. I'll pick in the word subtotal on the right side of the data menu, right there. Now we're back to this screen. We sort it by expense type, and that's why we're going to choose expense type here. It's important that you make that connection. That's the same field that you sorted. This time, I'll pick on the pull down, and I'll pick on count. How many was in each category. Now look at my mouse. It's okay to count those 2 columns. That's fine. But I'm going to uncheck it right there where it says replace current subtotal. I'm going to uncheck it. This way we'll see the sum and the count at the same time. So this time I have, at each change in expense type, use the function count for those 2 columns, and I unchecked it where it says replace current subtotal. I'm going to click on OK. Notice now for each category, we have the count and we have the total. And that happened all the way down. There's the count for dinner, entertainment, all the way down. And then at the very bottom, I have a grand count and a grand total. So it really gives you some great results. That's called the subtotals. Now, let's say you wanted to remove the subtotals. I'm going to pick on one cell that's not blank. I'll pick in the word subtotal right there. Now, one more thing I want to show you about this screen. It says page break between your groups. If you were to click on that and then print, each different expense type will be on a separate page. So that's a nice feature also. When I'm all done with it, I'll pick on remove all. And now we're back to normal, as you can see. A couple of really important steps to make that work. You have to have this big list of data. It's really important that the field names are up top. It's continuous all the way down to the bottom with no blank rows into the bottom. And then, of course, you want to sort by one of your columns. We sort it by expense type. Once we did that, it fell right into place. So if we go back to our slides, this slide is starting the subtotal feature out. Notice how it says you have to sort by one of our columns. I will go to the next slide. Then from here, we picked on data and then subtotal, and you get that window that we talked about. And then it starts to give you your subtotals, as you can see. Now, in the slides, I did it by country, but it would work for any field. And then here is where I did the summary based on that 1, 2, and 3 over here in the corner. I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay, now the next slide is going to talk about some built-in formulas that help you do your subtotals as well. So let's go back to Excel. So you can use the subtotal feature I just showed you. And then you can also use some built-in formulas. Notice over here, I want to get the count for the breakfast items only. Then you can use a built-in formula that's called COUNTIF. A regular count would count all of the data. If I only want to count certain ones based on the criteria, then you use a COUNTIF. Let's see how it's going to work. I'm going to type in equals, type in count. Let's go back to the FX. Maybe it's easier to follow that way. So I'll type in equals, and I'm picking this FX right there. Good. Now, in this case, I'll just type in the word count to search for it. And then when I picked in the word go, you see the word COUNTIF right there. I'm going to choose that, and I'll click on OK. COUNTIF. Now, the COUNTIF has 2 parameters. So for the range, that's where all the data is. I'll highlight the entire column F. That's where I'm looking. The criteria is what I'm looking for, and that's why I have the word breakfast in cell I2. So the range is column F, and the criteria is I2, which is the word breakfast. That's what I'm looking for. I'm going to click on OK. And it's going to give me a number. Here it says 16. So if we looked at column F, there's 16 breakfast items. Look at the formula over here. You could always type it in if you wanted to. Equals COUNTIF, open parentheses, F colon F, comma I2, close parentheses. Give me a count of all the breakfast items in column F. Now watch what we're going to do. We're going to copy that right on down. So I'll get the black cross and double click on the black cross again. And now they go all the way down. Now just like that, in a couple minutes, now I have a count for each category. So that's a great one to know about, count if. Another one that's similar is sum if. I want to get a sum of all the categories. So once again, I'll start the formula off with the equal sign. I'll pick on the fx. Now this time on this screen, I'll pick on the word sum right over here, and I'll pick on go. Now notice we have one that's called sum if, and I'll click on OK. Here's function arguments again. So the range is still going to be column F. That's where we're looking. The criteria is still going to be the word breakfast right there, which is I2. Now the sum range means what column do we want to sum for the breakfast items. I want to sum the numbers in column E. So for the sum range, I'll have a column E. For the range, I have column F. For the criteria, I have I2, which is the word breakfast. And for the sum range, I have column E. That's the number I want to sum up for the breakfast items. I'll click on OK. And we should have some other kind of number. We get 7385. So in other words, all the breakfast items totaled up to be 7385. I'm going to go get the black cross and double click there. Now I have the sum for all the categories. Can you see how useful these would be in large amounts of data? The count if and the sum if really gets you some nice results. Now, of course, there's one more that kind of goes along with it. It's the average if. I want to get the average of the categories. Type in equals. Once again, I'll click on the fx. And I'll type in the word average. Good. And then we see one that's called average if. I'll click on that. And you can see it's going to be very similar to the sum if. The range is still column F. The criteria is still the word breakfast over here. And the average range is still going to be column E. So the average if is similar to the sum if. Now I want to take the average of the breakfast items. I'll click on OK. And then there's the average of the breakfast items. Of course, I'll get the black cross and double click. And now I have the average for the other categories. Now, I would never hand it in like that. Of course, I would like to format that to make it look better. Well, we know about formatting probably. I'm going to highlight from column K to column L. Now, a lot of your formatting can be found under the Home menu. I'll pick on Home and come over here, and instead of General, we'll make it Currency Format. And you can see that makes it look a whole lot better. So 3 great functions in there: count if, sum if, and average if. They're really great for this large list of data, so you can get specific results based on these categories. Let's see what the next slide says. Here you can see the count if and sum if and average if. Oh, look at this slide. Here's how I did that. See how you can actually see the formulas within the cells? Let me just show you a quick way to do that, since this slide has that. I'll go back to the Excel spreadsheet, which is over here. Now watch. I'm going to pick on the view, the formulas menu. Formulas. Now you come over here and you pick on show formulas. And then notice how it really does expand to show you the actual formulas in the cells. All right, so sometimes it's important to see that. Now you can really see which cells have the formulas. When you're done with that, you'll pick on the word show formulas again on the formulas menu right there. And then it goes back to normal, as we can see. So that was that one slide in the slide deck. So since that happened, I might as well show you how to do that. Now, next, we can get into pivot tables. Now, we're going to have a whole session sometime in the future just on pivot tables. But here, let's kind of get started with a pivot table and show you some nice results that you can get pretty quickly. I'll go back to my Excel spreadsheet. In this case, I'm going to go back to a workbook that's called Pivot Table Examples. It's just different data. But notice how it still has the field names up top, and it's still one continuous block of data. So the same kind of data that we use for sorts and filters would work on a pivot table as well. A pivot table can summarize the data in all kinds of different ways. It's a really powerful tool. All right, so we start with data like this. These happen to be airline transactions, so each row is a different flight. I'm going to pick on one cell that's not blank. I'll pick on the Insert menu up top. Insert. And I'll pick on the word pivot table right there. Now, usually on this screen, we don't have to change anything. Usually it has the proper data range. This one does. Basically, it goes down to the next blank row and the next blank column. If you wanted to pick a different range, you can do that, but usually that is the correct range. Now, typically, I'll put the pivot table on a new worksheet. You could put it onto an existing worksheet, but usually I put it onto a new worksheet. So you hardly ever have to change anything on this window. This is not the screen where people get confused on with pivot tables. I'm going to click on OK. Now this is the screen where people get confused on with pivot tables. Let's see what's going on. We have a lot going on here. First of all, we're on a different sheet. My data is on sheet 1, as you can see. But we asked for a new sheet, and that's where we're on sheet 8 or the next available sheet. Notice how you have your field names over here. That's why I kept on saying it's so important to have your field names. The pivot table really does use this. You're going to move your mouse down to these different sections. So let's say I want to cross-reference for each office for each airline. That's going to give you some big clues. I'll pick up office and drag it down here into the rows. Now notice how each row over here became a different office. So the pivot table is really over here on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side over here, we're just building the pivot table. Each row became a different office because I moved the office into the rows right there. Now I'll pick up airline and drag that over here into the columns. Now notice what happened. Now each column is a different airline. Now to get some numbers in your pivot table, you're going to move something into the values section. So you would usually use a number field in the values section. I'll pick up the word total and drag it over here into the value section. And now, just like that, after 3 steps, I have a cross-reference for each office for each airline. Right? So notice how each office gives me a cross-reference for each airline. Each office gives me a row total over here. Each column gives me a column total at the bottom. And I even have a grand total. This is called a pivot table. It gives us some amazing results. You know, I have row totals and column totals and a grand total. Now, any field can be in the row section, and any other field can be in the column section. Let's say I want the same report by destination. Watch what I'll do. I'm going to pick up office and drag it back up to the fields. Now we just have a summary for each airline. Now I'll pick up destination and drag it down here into the rows. Now I have it broken down by destination by airline. So just move your fields back and forth into these different sections, and you're going to get some great results. This is called a pivot table. So any field can be in the row section. Any other field can be in the column section. Now, what if you wanted to have multiple layers of information? So look, I'll pick up commission, and I'll drag it down here to the rows. Now the commission is going to say yes or no, and now each destination is broken down into the yes or no's. You see, so you can have multiple layers of detail by adding more than one field into the row section, or more than one field into the column section. Plus, you could have as many as you wanted to. Now, I'm going to pick up the word commission and drag it back to the top. Like I said, sometime in the future, we'll have maybe a whole hour or 75 minutes on pivot tables just by itself, but I'm just getting you started here. Now, what if I wanted to do this by month or by quarter? Here's where we're going. I'm going to pick up the word airline from the columns and drag it back to the fields. Now I just have a summary by office, as we can see. So just move your fields back and forth to these different sections, and you'll get some nice results in your pivot table. This time I want to pick up the word flight date and drag flight date over here into the columns. Now, when we use the date field, it might break it down by date or by year or by month. Notice how this time it broke it down by year. Watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to right-click on that year number 2013, right-click. And then I'll pick on the word group. And then I can either put a date range into this window. You can pick as many as you wanted to down here. This time I'll just do it by month. And I'll click on OK. Notice now it's broken down by month. Now we're getting some real results from the pivot table. So watch again. I have a date field specifically in the column section. I'm going to right-click. You right-click either on the date or on the month or on the year. This time I'm going to right-click on January. and I'll pick on the word group. Now your data has to be fairly consistent for you to be able to pick on the word group. All of them have to be dates back on the other sheet. If they weren't all dates, it wouldn't let you group that. So I'll pick on the word group. Now I'm going to pick month and year this time. Month and year. I'll pick on OK. And now we have the year back. And notice how we have the year total. Now when you do it on yours, if you don't have the year total, here's the way you can get it on. I'm going to right click where it says 2014. You right click on one of your year numbers. Then I'll pick on the word subtotal years. In fact, let me uncheck it. So now notice how I don't have the year total anymore. I'm going to right click where it says 2014 and I'll pick on subtotal years. And now the year totals are back. I mean, look at the results that you really get with your pivot table. So that's another way, a great way to analyze your data. And hopefully you got some ideas. Just move your fields back and forth over to these sections and you can start to get some great pivot tables. Let me go back to the slides here. Here's how we got the pivot table started. You have this big list of data. You pick on one cell that's not blank. Then up here you pick on Insert and then Pivot Table. Usually on this window you'll just click on OK. Now we're on the next screen. Notice how I'm demonstrating how you would move maybe a field to the column section, a field to the row section, and then a field to the value section. And that will give you your first pivot table. Then you can kind of move your fields around and experiment after that. But that gets you started with your pivot tables. Then this is what the pivot table looks like after you move your fields around. Now the pivot table can have a chart. And we're going to start talking about charts now. So in this case, I'm going to go back to the Excel spreadsheet. And I'll go back to our pivot table right there. What if you want to have a chart from this data? Now in this case, I'm just going to summarize it by year. So watch what I'll do. I'm going to right click where it says May, and I'll pick on Group. Now I'll just pick year instead of month. All right, so I'll pick on the word year, and now summarize by year. All right, let's see how we can make a chart out of this. I'll pick on one cell that's not blank on the pivot table. Now when you pick on the pivot table, you get two extra menus up top. You get Analyze and you get Design. But you only get those when you click on your pivot table. So I'll pick on the word Analyze, and I'll pick on the word Pivot Chart. And now you have all your chart types. I'm just going to go for the column chart type, and I'll pick on the first one, and I'll click on OK. Here's a chart that comes from the pivot table, so it's called a pivot chart. I just made that bigger. Now, it works like a pivot table, and it works like a chart at the same time. Now, on the pivot table, I can come over here and do the filter. See how the filter is built right in, right there? And right over here, I can do the filter on the pivot table. But I can also filter on the chart. So I'm going to click on the pull down where it says Destination. Then I can pick the destinations right from there. Or I'm going to come over here and pick on the pull down where it says Flight Date. Then I can choose those from the chart as well. So it works like any other chart, but it's also works like a pivot table, so we call it a pivot chart. If you change the pivot chart, the pivot table will change, and if we change the pivot table, the chart will change. They're going to be tied to each other. Let's do some quick things with this chart. I would probably like it to say Chart Title up there. So let me show you how it works like any other chart. I'm going to click on that chart. Now when you click on the chart, you get some extra menus up top. In this case, I'm going to pick on the Design menu. Now you come over here and you say Add Chart Element. And I'll pick on the word Chart Title. And I'll say Above Chart. Good. Notice how we have the chart title there. Now you would want to type over that, so I'll type in Destination. Let's say Sales by Destination by Year. Sales by Destination by Year. When I hit the Enter key, notice how the chart title now says that. Now, another one that people like to see is something that's called a data label. Now, there's a lot of data in this chart. Let's see if we can make it a little bit bigger. I'm just going to stretch it out using the sizing handles. Good. Now, to do a data label, I'll pick on the Design menu. I'll say Add Chart Element, Data Label, and I like the one that's called Outside End. And notice how that put the numbers on each bar. That's not so bad, right? So a lot of times we want the numbers on the bars. That's called a data label, as we can see. So now we have a pretty nice chart. Maybe another feature I'd like to add to that chart is something over here, a title that would be called the axis title on the left-hand side. So once again, I'll say add chart element on the design menu. I'll say data label. And I'm sorry, in this case, I want the axis title. I'll say primary vertical, which is going to be on the side there. And notice how it says axis title on the side. So in this case, I'll type in dollars. When I hit the enter key, notice how it says dollars on the left. This guy up here is called the title, the chart title. These are called data labels. All right. So the chart works like a pivot table also. So for example, if I come over here and pick on destination, I can just pick and choose those. So I'll just pick on Boston, Cancun, Chicago, and so on. Now notice how the pivot table changed and the chart changed at the same time. Now I can just come back here and I'll go back to select all. And now the pivot table changes and the chart changes. What if I want the same chart and the same information by office? Watch. We're just going to flip our fields over here. So I'll pick up destination from the rows and drag it up. I'll pick up the word office and drag it down. And now we see the chart by office instead of destination. Okay? So you can really get some great results with the pivot table, with the charts, of course. Let's go back to our slides for a second. So you can see here it was starting to make the pivot chart on the slides under the Analyze menu. And here's the chart that we just saw. Now let me show you another great feature of a pivot table. It's called a slicer. A slicer is a new way to do a filter on the pivot table. All right, so I'm going to go back to the Excel spreadsheet, and we'll go back to our pivot table and our pivot chart. Now I'm going to move the chart up here because I know I'm going to need some extra room. Okay, this should be good. Now I'm going to come over here and I'll pick on the pivot table right here. Good. Now we'll pick on the Analyze menu. Then you pick one that's called Insert Slicer. Your slicers are made up of your fields and you can choose as many as you wanted to. So I'll pick on Tickets and Commission, just as an example. Now I could have chosen more than that, but this will make the point that I'm trying to make. These are slicer windows. Now you can move these, you can resize them, whatever you want to do. So I'm going to move these over here. So it's a new way to do a filter, except it's very visual. So I'll pick on 4 tickets. Notice how all of the data changed again because now it's just showing the records with 4 tickets. And I'll pick on yes over here. And the data changed again because now it's just 4 tickets with yes, you see? So now I can get the exact records that I'm looking for. You combine that with the filters that are already on the pivot table in the chart, and really you can get the exact records that you're looking for. This is pretty powerful. Now to get more than one from each column, I'm going to hold down the Control key. So I'm holding out Control key and I'll pick on 2, 3, and 4. I can pick more than one because I'm holding a Control key. Then I'll lift my finger. Good. Now I'll pick on no and yes by holding a Control key here. Look at this. I'm getting instant results. Get the exact records that we're looking for. It's very visual. People will love this back at work. All right, so really, the slicer is a great way to analyze your data as well. Those came in Excel 2010. Let me show you one more slicer that came in Excel 2013, and we'll start wrapping up. This one's called a timeline. So look, I'll pick on the pivot table over here. I'll pick on Analyze, and here I'll pick on Insert Timeline. A timeline is based on a date field, so we could do a date range. So I'll pick on flight date, and I'll pick on OK. This is a timeline. I'm going to move it right over here. Now notice how it's organized by month. Right now I'm going to pick on the word month, and I'll pick on the word year. Now it's organized by year. I'm going to scroll over here, and I'll just pick on the blue space below 2014, and notice how it's just showing me 2014. Or I can stretch that over to 2015, and you can see how that's changing the data as well. All right, so just amazing, amazing results that we can get with the pivot table and the slicer and the chart and the timeline. This is what Microsoft is calling a dashboard when we have these components working together. The way we got all these windows open with the pivot table is you click on the pivot table, and then we picked on the word Analyze. Here's Insert Slicer, Insert Timeline, and the Pivot Chart.